would like to introduce our discussion today with Howard Lawrence, Karen Wilk, Chantile Shannon, and Deanne Patsula. Howard is the co-founder of the Asset-Based Neighborhood Organization Association with John McKnight. He is also on the board of Abundant Communities Initiative Canada, consults on neighborhood health across North America, and is currently working with the City of Edmonton and Abundant Community Edmonton. Karen is a neighborhood connector animator. She has been deeply engaged in the neighborhood life for decades and has been instrumental in the development of Abundant Community Edmonton as a practitioner in her own neighborhood and an academic. She is also currently president of her community league and has been a significant resource in helping her community shift towards the principles of ABCD at the neighbor-to-neighbor, block-to-block level. Chantile is a passionate believer in the power and value of people working together. Born and raised in Regina, with strong connections to small rural hamlets, she knows firsthand the possibilities that can emerge from communities that care about each other, no matter how small. Chantile brings forward prairie hospitality in everything she does. Deanne is a passionate city builder who loves to explore both the tiny retail nodes nestled in the interior of neighborhoods and the expansive trail system of Edmonton's North Saskatchewan River Valley. Trained as a zoologist and a teacher, Deanne eventually found her way to the planning profession, first with Edmonton School Board and then with the City of Edmonton. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. Heather, are we underway?
You're on your way. Take it over.
Yeah, I just need there. So here we are. Yes, the four of us all participating together in Abundant Community Edmonton. Chantile's been instrumental in giving leadership at the city level and marshaling us around as we bring together the principles of asset-based community development and seek to have them a framework for every neighborhood in our city. So in the City of Edmonton, Chantile.
Great. Well, the City of Edmonton has always had a long investment in the power of communities. We have a 100-year history with community leagues or community associations, and we have over nearly 270 residential communities in Edmonton, and the city's investment includes having a staff person assigned to each of those communities to work alongside residents shoulder to shoulder to create more vibrant neighborhoods through relationships, recreation and social programs. And recently, our city council has further invested in this. We were just approved for an additional 3.5 full-time staff to focus specifically on Abundant Community Edmonton.
So there's our overview of what the city looks like. I see in the slide we're missing our dear Neighbourhoods branch, but we in the city have the Neighbourhoods branch, which is Chantile gives leadership to. Oh, there it is. As I push that. So there it is. So let's discuss a little bit of the Neighbourhoods branch and its role in the City of Edmonton.
Sure. The City of Edmonton, as I said, has always had these staff, and it is unique. Our staff are asset-based, place-based community development experts. So we frequently work with the community leagues, and recently, over the last couple of years, we've seen the power of Abundant Community Edmonton to create neighbor-to-neighborhood relationships, specifically by going literally door to door for neighbors to introduce themselves to one another, even people that they've lived across the street from for years and years. And it's by facilitating neighborhoods to do this, then the city kind of gives a legitimacy to what has become kind of a feeling of awkwardness for citizens to actually be able to go and introduce themselves to one another and enter into relationships. For the city, this is an important investment because we know that loneliness, stress are core to almost all illnesses. When we too see a rising tide of social isolation, of mental health challenges. And this is a way for the city to invest in a way that is more inclusive than any other means that we do.
And just thinking of Councillor McKean, so one of our city councillors actually has an urban isolation and mental health initiative. And I think that was helpful for us to just put or for the city to have on the map that this is an issue. And I think it points to the research around social capital that Robert Putnam had done in his book, Bowling Alone, which really does, as you said, Chantile, focus on the disintegration of social capital, which is really the connections of people, but our focus is particularly on the connection of neighbors to one another. Putnam says in his book, the community bonds and social networks have powerful effect on health, happiness, educational success, economic success, public safety, and especially child welfare. So Putnam has done the research. We've supported some of this research as we look for a rationale for the work that we're doing in the neighborhoods, with a focus not necessarily on those particular elements of health, child welfare, public safety, economic success, but our measurables are more in the area of just social capital. How can we build relationships at the neighborhood level? This is from a Maclean's article, The End of Neighboring, profiling a book both on public policy by Mark Dunkelman and on health specifically by Susan Pinker. And it just illustrates the current situation that we face. And I suppose it has slowly come upon us with this disintegration of the neighbor-to-neighbor relationship. There you are. The biggest need we have is community in every neighborhood, is a need for relationships with one another. So this is a slide that we've used often, and anybody want to speak to this? Just the fact that relational nutrients, we all need nutrients. We need our vegetables, proteins, our fruits, milks, dairy products. So in the same way, we need relational nutrients. Many of us have family and friends, but the nutrient of the neighbor is what is oftentimes missing for a balanced diet and a relational diet. And this relationship is different than the friend and family relationship. It provides something that those relationships often don't have. For instance, family is oftentimes not in proximity, although family is a group that you didn't choose, just like neighbors. Friends are people who we choose and we have affinity with. Neighbors, we don't always have affinity with. In fact, this is where the diversity comes in, as we connect with one another outside of our age and interests, and sometimes even our ethnic or religious orientations. We meet people who are very different than us. Friends is oftentimes the focus in our culture. We think that the need that we have in our hearts and our souls is for more friends. And we're exploring the fact that perhaps it's the neighboring relationships that's so important to us.
The unique thing about the neighboring relationship is, as we said, it's so inclusive. And so regardless of your age, regardless of your ability or ethnicity, you belong just by virtue of living there. And one of the amazing things that we've seen in Edmonton is we even have in some of our neighborhoods where homeless people are involved in the life of the neighborhood, and they are actively invited to be one of the group. So it's really exciting.
Yeah. And those are the Homelessness Initiative, which many municipalities have taken on. Caring people within neighborhoods can embrace and reach out, not necessarily in friendship and certainly not in family, but in neighborliness to people who are without a home. This conference, which some of our staff attended in 2015, which was a Tamarack conference, had, which caught our eye in the brochure, topics that are explored. And I think it caught our eye for a number of reasons. Why are neighborhoods back on the agenda? They really did slip off the agenda. Why is asset-based thinking so critical? Asset-based community development really, we believe, is the path forward. How do we decentralize city services? Well, we want to engage all citizens where they live and where they have responsibility. Can neighborhoods be centers of community life? How awesome is that? This is the place that all of us belong by virtue of our postal codes. Can neighborhoods be places of belonging, which I think for some would seem like a soft issue to be dealing with, but no, it's an important issue, one that we're looking at. And then obviously so much is taken up in can neighborhoods be places of caring for children, people with developmental disabilities, homeless people, people in poverty, all need for us to be caring citizens with one another. This is from a report that was done by the United Way with Halton out there in Ontario, looking at the fact that enormous investments from government, as well as other single focus, let's call them single focus service providers, complex problems such as social exclusion, poor health outcomes continue to characterize life in many neighborhoods in Canada. And they asked this profound question, so what is it that we're not getting? What do we need to change? And I think their answer was assuring to us, and seemed to make sense to us, that over the last years, with hope of having greater impact, funders and others, municipalities, have turned to place-based investment in programs, services, and approaches, returning to the terra firma, the places that people live, and focus their efforts on that particular social unit that we've had down across cultures and down through generations, the place called the neighborhood, where neighbors take responsibility for one another.
So as a municipality, the municipal government is the level of government that is closest to citizens. And the focus has shifted so much from being that level of government that takes care of your garbage and your drainage problems to working with citizens. And we know more and more that the investment that we have in our citizens creates better neighborhoods. We know, for example, that the rate of youth crime in any neighborhood is inversely proportional to the number of people who know the kids' names. And so it's really simple. And we, through our investments in neighborhoods, we have just the most wonderful anecdotes of how kids are involved with other generations, and they're actively involved in activities that are really organically arising in the neighborhood, which is keeping people connected. Karen has lots of good examples of those.
We're going to look at those. Even the other one here we're just looking at is new Canadians. We have wonderful stories of new Canadians, in our case, sometimes refugees, moving into neighborhoods and being supported by their neighborhood. This is an example out of Calgary, where an actual newcomer comes and says, volunteer. This is important. And we've discovered that oftentimes newcomers to Canada have a real agenda for connecting in the neighborhood. So we see a number of areas where connection is helpful. This, Chantile just mentioned this one, but I do want to say that we don't have time here, but for each of these areas are quite well researched in terms of the connection among neighbors delivering a specific outcome in that focused area. This one in particular with, we picked child maltreatment because if it takes a village to raise a child, certainly maltreatment of children is a big concern for us. But in this report, which was done by the Aspen Institute, nope, this one wasn't done by it's a 2017 report that was done in the Journal of Child Abuse and Neglect. And here it says that not only is child maltreatment reduced when neighbors know each other, but also that we have better health and academic health and mental health outcomes. There we go. Oh, and this is an example of one of our neighborhoods, and we're looking toward this taking place in more neighborhoods as the demand for youth groups grows in the neighborhood. So this is a youth group that's unique. It's in a neighborhood run by the 20-somethings of the neighborhood, supported by the parents of the neighborhood, and I think celebrated by the community league and leadership of the neighborhood. So this is an example of how we can take responsibility for the youth. Chantile mentioned a rising tide floats all boats. This in the area of all of these single focuses from what are there? So we've got some of the things that we've been talking about, which we see improvements, we're looking for improvements in, would be disaster preparedness.
Right. Also addressing, seniors' loneliness and supporting people to age in place in the neighborhood. We have folks who are focused in on working with Indigenous populations or people with disabilities or seniors. And all of those are really important things. The advantage of working at the neighborhood level is that you're working with everyone all together. So the idea of a rising tide floats all boats, rather than focusing on helping an individual to overcome the odds of their disadvantage, we try and change the odds so that everybody has a greater chance of success.
So community development is where we're after, and here we've used, this is where we've used the Aspen Institute paper on social capital and community building to look at what are the outcomes we're after. So a built community is one in which residents look out for both themselves and each other. Perfect. Create environments which a critical number of residents are positively invested. So it follows that a community building process would focus on meaningful ways for people in the neighborhood to connect with one another. So that's what we're trying to do. This has greater specificity in this article where it says, so really what we're trying to identify in a strong or a built community are block associations. So if you can just imagine, what does a block association look like, or an associated block? A block or a building floor or a cul-de-sac where people actually know each other. They've moved from just independent house dwellers to an actual group called the block. Stable local voluntary associations, everything from, as we've seen, we want knitting groups, seniors groups, kids groups, social justice groups, leadership groups, various kinds of groups in a neighborhood. So stable local voluntary associations. And then high levels of informal neighbor-to-neighbor interaction, which, just saying that, I think we can imagine the joy that it is when people greet each other on the sidewalks, on the streets, when they leave in the morning, and just hang out in the parks together. So how do we get there? This is what we're looking at. I'm going to not take much time with that, but there's a theory of change that we have been looking at, again, provided by the Aspen Institute. But putting this into practice, we read the book, The Abundant Community, and then used it a bit as the platform from which to launch the Abundant Community Initiative to become Abundant Community Edmonton, collaborating with John and Peter. Any comments on that?
Well, I'd like to say that from a city, this really started when one individual read the Abundant Community book and then started to try it out, knocking literally on the doors of his neighbors to see how this would work. And found that even after living in that neighborhood for many years, that the character of the neighborhood began to change when people really took time to get to know each other, and not just in a hello, how are you kind of way, but where the conversations became much more intentional about, what do you care about in this neighborhood? What gifts do you have that you might like to share with the neighborhood in terms of skills, abilities, and talents? What would you like to do with others? And from that change, that the person who initially started that door knocking, who is very humble, I won't mention his name, came knocking on the city's door. And in spite of our long history of working with communities and all of the advantages that we've seen as a municipality from that, we knew right away that there was something even more powerful about this, and it was worth investing in. So we have worked then alongside Howard and as well as our community partners to continue to grow this. And the lovely thing for us has been that, like anywhere else, we've been more and more challenged to find people who are able to volunteer their time for many things. What we found with Abundant Community Edmonton is that we aren't asking people to be volunteers. We're asking them to come into relationship with one another. We're inviting them and giving them opportunities, providing them some support through our staff and through some little bits of funding for block parties and other ways of getting together to just kind of kick things off. And those relationships are spurring all kinds of activities and events that the city no longer has to support because they're happening so easily on their own.
That's great. Thanks, Chantile. So let's look at some of that. So our neighborhoods are human scale. I think it's important to say that our neighborhoods in Edmonton are approximately, and I say approximately because with that number of neighborhoods, they're all over the map, but approximately 1,000 households. And they each have independent leadership called the Community League, and that would be the executive. This is an image of an actual annual general meeting with the election of the officers. So there would be volunteer president and vice president, treasurer, programs person, so a variety of things. And Karen, in fact, is a president of one of the community leagues, and so she would have been voted in. Now, she's also been a neighborhood connector in her neighborhood, and we'll get to that role specifically in a moment. So this is where our ABCD framework takes on the individual neighborhood in a very workable manner. And so here's a diagram. So residents gather together thinking we would like to build a sense of connection and belonging in our neighborhood, animating or making come alive the gifts of each individual. So someone, a block connector, takes responsibility for that role. And we'll look at those responsibilities in a moment. There's a support team that nurtures this because our community leadership, we've found, is busy tending to the things that they've been busy with, noble tasks that they've had for many, many years. And so we don't want to ask them for more, but more individuals from the neighborhood chime in and lend their hand to getting this off the ground. So here's the role of the block connector. What does a block connector do? Someone on the block is the point person. So they have everybody's email, phone numbers, party person. They get something going on the block once or twice a year, and listener. And we'll look at that in just a moment. So this is a scenario where there was a block connector getting to know, two block connectors actually in this case, getting to know a woman who they never met on their own block. Right there. Karen, do you maybe have a, now Karen has lots of stories as well from the block connector perspective. You're a block connector on your own block too, you and Steve?
Yes, yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what you do and the life of a block connector. We'll look at
those three descriptions are really good. And the point person piece connects people at the block level so that they have an opportunity if the garage door is open or they see their neighbor's dog out, to contact that person instantly, and or if there's someone's going on vacation, to take care of their home, pick up the mail, and so on. And then the point person also connects with the greater neighborhood community league, so that when there's a seniors tea at the hall, they can go knock on the door and all their seniors on their block and invite them to participate in that. So the point person works in all kinds of different ways.
So while some individuals find it easy to meet their neighbors, some I know have a bit of a struggle. So this connector card that ACE has provided, how does that work?
It's very helpful. As Chantile said at the beginning, the city backing this helps when a neighbor knocks on the door. They say, hey, I'm your block connector. The city has asked me to help us connect with one another, to help us have parties and get to know each other. And we have this little card. You're going to keep this piece with my email, so I'm making myself vulnerable as a block connector, and my phone number, so you can connect with me. And can you tell me a little bit about what your vision for the neighborhood is and how you'd like to join in neighborhood activities? And it's very helpful for the block connectors.
And one of the things that makes it easy as well is right in the card, it sets up the date for a block party. And, block parties are block parties, and they're easy to dismiss as just block parties. But in the same way as you wouldn't want to dismiss Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner from a family, even though they're done over and over again, it's the same old turkey. Block parties are key. Yeah, I know, turkey's good. The block party too is similar to that in the life and fabric of the neighborhood. It's a time when the neighbors, or this block in particular, rally together, and people who don't maybe see each other up here Edmonton. In the wintertime, it's chilly, so you don't see each other. So it's nice to have a block party. And I know June is our block party month when people do get together. And there's a rich experience of connection. It's one of Laurier's block parties, people just getting together. Again, from just people who maybe wouldn't typically get together, certainly in terms of age and background, and they come out and meet each other. It can be a large block party, small block party, whatever, just gathering together.
And you know, some block parties are a little more planned. They bring in food trucks and fire trucks and ice cream parlors, and others are very casual, spontaneous potluck dinner in the green space. One of the cool things on our block, one of our first ones, was the kids got a football game going, and they included the gentleman with Down syndrome. They included 3-year-olds, 67-year-olds, and they just began this great spontaneous football game with everyone. And one of the older ladies sat down next to me and said, "This is what Neighborhood's supposed to be about."
No,
she had tears in her eyes, and she was just so moved by seeing that football game.
So many great things come at block parties. This is an event that happened in my neighborhood. I was visiting I am a neighborhood connector, and I was helping the block connector with their event. I came over, and 4 babies born in 2017 who hadn't met each other, all met, and then the 2016 baby had already gone to bed. And one of the moms said, "I saw you push your stroller by, and at the window I stood longingly wishing I could meet you." And it wasn't until this block party that they actually had a chance to meet. It's a significant event in an individual's life. Just quickly, this is fun. This is a recent, we're calling it the Flash Block Party, because this individual, who is not only a neighborhood connector, but as we try to encourage, always encourage the neighborhood connectors who give leadership on the whole neighborhood to be also leadership on their own block. And so Michael was doing a flash block party. He and his son went around from 4:30 to 5 to hand out invitations for the block party that would begin at 5 and end at 5:30. And they went around and delivered the invitations. 4 households came out just to see what this was about, to meet one another. And yeah, it was a great event for them. Nice and spontaneous.
It was. And I just want to point out too that we have really great examples of this kind of connection happening in even some of our more socially disadvantaged neighborhoods, where people don't necessarily have the resources to have big picnics or anything like that. As a municipality, we do have really small bits of funding that we are able to support people with. And but people have done things like, just set up a folding card table and made coffee available. Yeah. They set it up right on the sidewalk in the winter in their community and just stopped passersby and said, "Hi, I'm your neighbor. Can I pour you a cup of coffee?" And so it doesn't have to be big, doesn't have to be fancy. It just needs to be sincere.
Yeah, it's great. So the other thing that the block connector does is listen. And this is an occasion where Harpreet, the block connector, listened to Elizabeth and found out wonderful things, like she was a nationally known artist, lived right in our midst, and we didn't know. And so this happens in many ways. We see the gifts of individuals. There we go. People behind the doors of their homes have gifts, skills, and abilities, and they want to offer them. And we want to put the neighborhood together. Of course, asset-based community development does this. We take people's visions, people's ideas, what interests you have, what are your passions, and your skills, abilities, and experiences. We put them together and build a neighborhood from that strength-based perspective. So this is the questions we ask. What vision do you have for the neighborhood? What activities and what skills, gifts, and abilities do you have? What do we do with that? We actually have a couple of very amazing databases that were created just for this kind of an initiative for Abundant Community Edmonton and Abundant Community Initiative. They're generally free for every neighborhood to have, and neighborhoods from across North America are now using these databases, and they're for you to use as well. You can be in touch with us if you'd like to learn more about these databases and how they take names, just demographic information, and also the asset-based information, pastimes, vision, and gifts that neighbors would have to offer. And there we go. There's a map. There's the block connectors who are identifying this information, getting back to the database, building connection on their block. This is a block connector gathering. Karen's giving leadership to this. So what's a block connector gathering?
So the neighborhood connectors try and get their block connectors together about once a month, tell some stories, do a little bit of equipping and training, encouraging each other, talking about the role and what they're learning about the neighborhood, and just supporting each other and actually having quite a bit of fun.
That's great. And then we have, so in order to support neighborhood connectors, which is the person that, as you saw, is supporting all of those block connectors, we have a city staff. Now, Chantile's mentioned this, but maybe we could learn a little bit more about the city staff that are supporting directly supporting the neighborhood and how they do that.
Sure. Well, our staff do a lot beyond just the Abundant Community Edmonton Initiative, but they are assigned to every neighborhood in Edmonton, and it's our job really to connect with citizens and work with them to make their neighborhoods the places that they want to be. One of the great things that we do to support the people who are involved in abundant communities is by having a regular monthly Saturday morning sort of community of practice conversation. So this is where some of our staff, some neighborhood connectors, block connectors, sometimes just interested people will drop in, and it's a great time to just support one another in the work of it, share inspiring stories, also challenges and tools. And it works particularly well, I think, because the experts are the people in the community who are doing this work, and our staff and citizens are real equals in making this happen. There's no experts, everybody is one.
And the city supports it with really good food for breakfast that day.
It's very nice. Thanks.
And I'd just like to say also that started off in a single home, and there was so much interest in it that we now do this regularly at city facilities, which is a nice growth pattern.
So although some of the measurables that the city has determined are around the quality of the work in the neighborhood, numbers of block connectors, neighborhood connectors, how many conversations are taking place, we're also keeping track of the numbers of neighborhoods and new neighborhoods as well. I think we're ready to take any questions that you might have. Heather, do you have some questions that have come in that we can answer? Do we have time for a few questions?
We do. Thank you so much for this presentation. I was madly writing down lots of great points, and some of the things that I came out with from this is that building neighborhoods increase the health of citizens. And so putting health into the neighborhood is a great buy-in for municipalities, for organizations to get together and really rally behind neighborhood development. You talked about some great resources, Robert Putnam's book, The Theory of Change, which maybe sometime down the road we can dive into a little bit more. The Abundant Community. You talked about some of the resources you have within Abundant Community Edmonton that you, such as connector cards, resources, a resource guide for the block connector, etc. And the database. Yeah. And that I really liked when you talked about the municipalities not asking for volunteers, and we do know that volunteerism is decreasing. Not a lot of people are doing it, and so that quote that you said was, that not asking for volunteers, but encouraging and building relationships, which then build or increase the grassroots organic activities that are truly the needs and wants of each individual community instead of guessing. So that really resonated with me. So thank you very much for that. We do have some questions. So Merv has a question about the job description, and I think Karen, maybe you might be able to answer this piece about, is there a job description and what is the time commitment And then if you could talk about how long you've been a connector and why you still are a connector.
So Karen, which job? So probably
So the neighborhood connector, the
Yeah,
city has helped those job descriptions. The block connector is basically, as we said, the point person, the party person, and the listener. And then the neighborhood connector does that as well, but then supports all the other block connectors in their role, and also the database and the connection with the support team and the community league, so that there's lots of interaction, so that we really are knitting together a stronger social fabric by taking the interest from the database and putting them into groups and all those kinds of pieces. What was the other part of the question?
Why are you still?
Oh, why am I still doing this? I love it. It's life-giving. We have great relationships with our neighbors, and we've seen significant impact at the very micro block level right through to the bigger neighborhood level. We have 1,100 households in our neighborhood. We have a seniors home included in that, and the connections between all of the people in the neighborhood, the little bit of retail space, as well as the organization, through churches and the school, have just been enriched as we've participated in this.
Mm-hmm. And what's your sort of time mean? Like, not how much time does it take to be one?
To be a block connector? I mean, a lot of it is how much the citizen, the neighbor, wants to put into it. I put quite a bit of time in, but then I've got two roles: the president role and the neighborhood connector role. So it's
and block connector.
And block connector. So it would be hard for me to kind of dissect out without a little bit of thought how much for each. I would say our average block connectors are putting in about 10 hours a month, and some of that is partying. And if you include that, it might be a bit bigger.
It's an interesting question. It would be a little bit like asking how much time does being in my case, a dad take. I don't know. It's a social role that I play in my environment called my family. And really, this is just a leadership role in a social environment called the block, the building floor, or the cul-de-sac. So you probably tend to it periodically, but it's not all about those activities. There's a notion called ambient neighborhood. What's the climate that you're creating on the block for that senior who is not accessing your companionship or your care, but just knows that you're present and available? It's worth a lot. So it's hard to answer.
Yeah, we do acronym with our block connectors, SAFE. You're seeking out spontaneous connections. You want to be available and accessible. So, walking your dog out, sitting out front, going to the local grocery store, just being available. So you're bumping into your neighbors in a regular way. Frequently, that's the F of SAFE. And then the E is for at ease. So in the context of your neighborhood, people are seeing you in your gardening clothes or your paint clothes, and it's okay to say hello to each other when you're taking out your garbage in your house coat and that kind of thing. It's a different kind of a setting than a professional place or even an affinity group. So developing safe relationships, it's hard to put an hour on that.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we've got another question. Haiba asks, what are ways to increase and maintain residents' participation and involvement in the community? So what are some ways that you do that to keep the participation going?
Actually, once it begins to take hold in a neighborhood, it's kind of like a drop rippling across the top of the water, and a block connector connects with somebody else, and it actually does it itself. It grows on its own. So it's organic. We find that neighbors want to participate more and more, and I had 3 emails this week about different people who said, you know what, I love knitting. I'd be happy to teach knitting to some people in the neighborhood if they're interested. Somebody else is a cigar smoker, and apparently there's 8 other people in our neighborhood when we suggested that who like to smoke cigars. So now they're meeting once a month and talking about that. I mean, it's a bizarre one, but there you go. The gardeners are getting together, the walkers are getting together, and it's because it's their interest and passion, and finding somebody down the street or 3 blocks over that does that just makes it really easy and fun, and it grows.
And there's also the dimension of this where caring begins to happen, from a senior that breaks their hip to a person who's has addictions issues, which is very real, addiction issues, and need someone to facilitate some of their process toward recovery. So a group of neighbors might get together and help in that regard. So and someone hears about that and says, well, my cousin could use a friend that's been in recovery as well. Or it could be the need to support a youth in the neighborhood, and somebody who they have built a relationship with through the Friday night youth group, tends to them over and over. And then that parent invites them in and has supper with them. And one thing leads to another. So it's really organic growth, I think. We do need to be vigilant and intentionality. So here in Edmonton, our June being Block Party Month, we want to really reinvigorate block parties so that people will get out. Another way that we encourage people is by passing out information. If there's a spring party in the neighborhood, take that opportunity on your block to hand out a personalized invitation to that to each of your neighbors. So whether they come or not, they've been welcome to this event. So there's a number of ways to do this.
Yeah, and the scare piece, I think, is significant, because you see that happen at the block level as well as the neighborhood, bigger neighborhood level.
From a municipal perspective too, I can add that sometimes you have neighbors who are complaining about the way that each other maintains their yard, and they have those challenges. And one thing that ACE has been able to do, it helps people understand what's going on for their neighbor. Maybe you're not looking after your yard because you've had an injury or something. So rather than it becoming a ticketing issue from a municipal perspective, it becomes a neighbors helping neighbors issue. So that's the side benefits that we didn't anticipate from the outside.
Yeah, and instead of complaining to the city about a neighbor, neighbors know each other, so they can go and say, hey, when you leave the house, the dog barks nonstop. What can we do about this? Yeah.
That sounds personal.
Somebody on my block complained about that.
So building on interest and passion really means that they stay interested and involved versus trying to force something.
Yeah,
for sure.
We have another question about the database, which I knew we would. Gerald and Merv have 2 questions around the database. One is has there been any issues with soliciting, like using the database to solicit for your own personal benefit or business?
Well, in fact, I think I hear in the background of that kind of multi-level business ideas, and we would say of that, fine, do what you need to do, but because of the proximity of your neighbors and the relationship that you have with your neighbors, there's a real sense of accountability and care that has to be extended as a neighbor advances their business. But by the same token, we want economic development in the neighborhood. So if there's from babysitters to plumbers to lawyers, we want people to let their vocations, whether those for profit or for money or for volunteer or for free, we want to advocate for people's businesses in the neighborhood. So we haven't seen abuses. And if there has been abuses, I think they've been curtailed quite quickly by the social contract between neighbors, let's say.
And the other question is, can we get the link for the database info?
Yes, we can provide you with that if they just be in touch with us at, we've given you some emails that you'll see a little bit later on. You can be in touch with us and we can get you hooked up with database
look at the databases. Yeah.
And we can include them in a post email that will happen after this webinar.
For sure. Those databases were actually gifted to Abundant Community Edmonton by a couple of people who got involved in the neighboring aspects and said, wow, we have this IT talent, and they put a lot of time and effort and gifted it to us.
Yeah.
Which is wonderful.
That's great. So we have another question. Do you have examples you can share from neighborhoods where you were able to engage organizations such as churches, hospitals, schools, and local business as part of your efforts?
Yes, we have quite a few. I can give you a school one. So, this actually was a seniors organization that came into our neighborhood to care for our seniors. And you hear how that works. These are our seniors. They came into our neighborhood to care for seniors, which we appreciated. They wanted to work with the school to have a community garden at the school tended to by seniors. They asked us as a neighborhood, well, how do we find your seniors? And we were able to just go into the database, not only find seniors, but gardeners. And we were able to give them, send out a letter from the principal of the school, inviting people from our neighborhood to come in and share with the students of the school, seniors in particular, come and care and garden alongside the students. So that would be one example. Karen, I think you have others.
Yeah, and I mean, it's at different levels, I think. At one level, there's a sense, well, this is our neighborhood. So if you're a part of our neighborhood, yes, of course. So we actually call out the gifts that are in the neighborhood. So the people that are connected with organizations are the ones that get more involved in the neighborhood. So for example, somebody has worked with parenting, helping and counseling families, especially those who maybe have some dysfunction. And now she's volunteering her expertise and the support of her organization to do some parenting courses in the neighborhood with neighbors.
And churches have been good about, a number of churches have given money towards sponsorship or helping to pay for the neighborhood connector. So they've contributed a few $1,000s to that end. We also have a part of the database which is actually collecting. It's a new database that is attached to the one that we're talking about, which collects the individual's information, the personal information, but in asset-based community development terms, both the groups and also the triangles, which are the organizations of a neighborhood, we are databasing or collecting those and making those available on the Community League's website for the citizens to access as well. So we want to engage the service providers and make known the groups in the neighborhood for sure. Other questions?
Does the city need to be on board, or can it be initiated by another organization?
Well, I just want to speak to that first. Peter Block, in the early days, while he said most ABCD initiatives are not initiated by municipalities, there's a special quality when a municipality initiates this initiative, and it's primarily, interestingly, Peter says, around trust. People trust municipalities, but and certainly from our perspective, what we've seen here and my experience with ABCD, I think that where possible, a municipality initiating this or standing with this initiative is really valuable. But I'll let Chantile speak as representative of the municipality.
Sure. I think it could start anywhere. It's really just a very logical kind of approach. It's kind of reviving the lost art of neighborhood. The advantage of having the municipality involved is, as Howard says, is that trust and legitimacy that it gives to the program, still a tiny bit of funding. It also has great advantages for the municipality because as we're building up the health and well-being of citizens, we're preventing crime. It just has lots of good reasons for a municipal government to be involved, like beyond altruism. There's also a good social return on investment. I personally, it's just for our municipal government, it's made a change to thinking in our corporation, where it's helped to advance an integration agenda between all of our departments. So it's not just those of us who are working in the social aspects of our city, but people who are developing hard infrastructure are coming to us now and saying, hey, can you help us connect better with your community so that we do a better job of engaging citizens around infrastructure development. So it's working in a lot of new ways that again, we didn't anticipate at the outset that are turning out to be huge advantages for us.
Great. So another question is, can you comment on how these practices assist cities in reducing poverty?
Well, one of the, I mean, we write, and I think we've experienced, there are many services, and oftentimes people in poverty need someone, and the neighbor is very well positioned to be this in the absence of family and oftentimes friends who aren't there. The neighbor is there positioned to broker those services on behalf of a neighbor who just isn't able to, for one reason or another, could be emotionally, could be transportation issues, could be awareness issues, not able to access those particular services that would help them move out of poverty. And we know, and we've looked at theories of change around poverty, we know that simple relationships, social skills, access to immediate care, babysitting care, access to financial counseling, all which neighbors can provide to that individual who's struggling with poverty, are provided within walking distance of their home. So that would be one example that we're particularly focused on and actually experimenting with.
Okay, so I'm just looking at the time. Thank you very much to everyone for your questions. And thank you, Howard and Lawrence and Karen and Deanne, for taking the time out and sharing your stories and the work that the fabulous work actually that you're doing in Edmonton. I just want to talk about a few slides here. Stay in touch with us at Vibrant Communities, Cities Deepening Community. Receive the latest thinking, news, tools, and resources from Deepening Community Learning Community by subscribing to our bi-monthly newsletter, or visiting us online and join one of our community of practices. If you enjoyed this session with Howard and Karen and Chantile and Deanne, don't miss this 3-day ABCD Canada workshop taking place from April 17th to 19th. Join Cormac Russell, John McKnight, and over 100 ABCD practitioners and trainers from across Canada and the US. You'll build your own agenda by selecting from exciting workshops and community excursions. You'll walk away with tools, new ideas, and inspiration for your local work, new connections, and more. This learning event will dive deeper into the ABCD approach to neighborhood development and community health work, and will be indispensable for anyone participating in these fields. You can go to our website to learn more. In a few days, you'll receive our follow-up email, which will include a link to the audio recording for today, as well as learning opportunities we've just mentioned. We'll make sure we put that link in there for the database. You can email me, Heather at tamarackcommunity.ca, to provide feedback about this webinar. We're trying to improve on the experience. So thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great afternoon or morning, depends on where you are.